Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time the question comes to us from Stone Rain Productions, who asked, "Hey Thor, have you heard the rumor that Disney is going to sell Lucasfilm?" Another very well-known streamer posted a video George Lucas himself may be interested in buying it back. Thoughts? Okay, so yes, I have heard this rumor kind of talked about, which is not me saying I've heard it from any type of source I may have, just that I've heard of the rumor itself and seen it being discussed in some places online. And honestly, I just don't know about this one. I don't know that Disney would ever sell Star Wars or sell Lucasfilm for multiple reasons, short of being in a horrible financial crisis that all but forced them to sell. And really the first and primary reason is, and I've talked about this before, but the potential Star Wars has in the right hands is incredible. It is unlimited power, right? It is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, franchises in history, which in turn means it has one of the biggest fan bases and hence the potential for crazy money to be made off of it, again, in the right hands. And I really think Disney's fear in selling it would be that it would fall into the right hands from the fan perspective, and in a way the wrong hands from their perspective. That they'd end up selling it to someone, a company, whatever it might be, who put out consistently good content that appealed to or was enjoyed by the majority of the fan base, and that it would also inevitably see increased merchandise sales and all that good stuff. And this would be huge competition for them and the currently struggling a bit Marvel franchise they also own. Which actually brings us to the oft forgotten, or no longer talked about I should say, reason that Disney, about a decade ago now, bought both of those franchises in the first place, why Bob Iger pursued the purchase of Lucasfilm so diligently, which was so that they, Disney, would have more franchises or more appeal in general to boys, an area they felt they were severely lacking in, and which is actually something I've been meaning to do a whole video on because I think it's a very interesting discussion to be had. Anyway, I don't know that, again, Disney would want to risk someone taking Star Wars and having massive success with it and overshadowing and beating Marvel, especially when those two franchises are kind of the backbone of Disney Plus right now, excluding, of course, their extensive library of original content from over the years. But most everything new they put out on that platform is, well, it's either Star Wars or Marvel, at least that gets any sort of attention, and Iger has even talked recently about leaning more heavily into those two franchises and less into, shall we say, unproven franchises like Willow, for example. And then when you consider they know full well streaming is the present and future of entertainment, and that Disney Plus is already not living up to what they had hoped for, they're even seeing a decrease in subscribers, well, selling Lucasfilm, selling the potential that Star Wars has, it kind of feels like putting the nail in their own coffin, honestly. And mind you here, I am no expert in any of this, I'm just someone who tries to look at these things as logically as possible. Nevertheless, let's move on and entertain the idea or this possibility that Disney would sell Lucasfilm or is currently seeking to, or just open to the idea perhaps. Do I think George Lucas would buy it back? And to start here, we can't forget the reason why Lucas sold in the first place. And no, it wasn't because fans said mean things about him and the prequels. I hopefully sort of debunked that ridiculous belief in a video a few weeks back. Because I mean, if Star Wars fans being mean or harsh with their criticisms were so influential, one would figure Kathleen Kennedy would have quit years ago. She's received so much more of it than Lucas ever did, yet she's still going strong. So anyway, we can't forget why George Lucas sold in the first place, which was because he'd just gotten remarried and he had a child and just felt like he didn't have the time to devote to Star Wars anymore. That he didn't want to spend what could essentially become close to a decade working on another trilogy. And keep in mind, he said all that back at the age of 69, so now at the age of 79, and not to be morbid, but who knows how many years left in front of him, I highly doubt his mind has changed at all in that department. I highly doubt he now suddenly wants to devote large amounts of time to making Star Wars. If anything, he'd probably be more in the camp of, I just want to enjoy the rest of my life with my family. And sure, you could make the argument that if he bought it back, he wouldn't have to be that involved. He could just make sure it wasn't going in the wrong direction anymore, and he could be like the grand overseer rather than in there kind of daily doing any of the writing and or directing. He could be like the emperor sitting on a throne giving either his thumbs up or his thumbs down to ideas or concepts or whatever it might be. But again, part of the reason he didn't initially do something like that, why he didn't just not sell and have someone else essentially make his sequels for him with him kind of hovering in the background, is because, as he's admitted, he doesn't or can't work that way. He said he knew he'd want to get in there and be running and controlling everything if he didn't sell, And so, as I've theorized elsewhere, I think one of the reasons he made Kathleen Kennedy president of Lucasfilm before selling was because he thought, well, for one, with her being such a good friend, she'd still listen to him quite a bit, especially considering she is not the most knowledgeable when it comes to Star Wars. I think she has proven that with some of her comments over the years. Yet at the same time, with George no longer owning it, she could also, in a sense, keep him away or keep him from getting too involved or having too much control, which would sort of be the best of both worlds for George Lucas. He still has some influence over the story, but he wouldn't end up getting sucked in and spending all his time on it because he wouldn't be allowed to. But of course, we know how that all worked out, or didn't work out. We know his story treatments were completely thrown out, and he wasn't involved virtually at all in the making of the sequels. He even said in an interview shortly after The Force Awakens came out that they didn't seem too keen on having him around or being much a part of it. So all that said, I guess the question would have to be just how much does George Lucas care about what Disney has done to Star Wars, or how much does he care about the legacy of Star Wars itself? And obviously, he cares quite a bit. He has compared the films he did to children, or like they're his children. Thus, they're clearly extremely important to him. And so, is there any possibility he'd buy it back, which we make sound so simple, like it's an easy process, like you just whip out a credit card? Anyway, is there any possibility he'd then buy it back and try to sort of get it back on track with the kind of last years of his life? And even if he did, who exactly does he leave it to after? Who takes over after Lucas is gone? And though, sure, I suppose there's a possibility he would buy it back just to kind of save it, but honestly, in my opinion, when it comes to the legacy of Star Wars, what Disney has done does not tarnish George Lucas's legacy. In my book, we're talking about two completely different things. We're talking about George Lucas Star Wars, and then there's Disney Star Wars. Even the expanded universe, as much as I enjoyed and loved it, I always saw it as something independent or separate from what George Lucas had done. And as I've said before, probably the smartest thing Disney could have ever done with Star Wars, to start it off anyway, was to just make George Lucas's sequel trilogy how he wanted them to make it. It was kind of a win-win scenario for them. If most people loved it, well, they make a ton of money, and they can also springboard off of that into the future. And if people didn't enjoy George's sequels, they basically then have free reign, a blessing from the fans, if you will, to do something completely new and different with the franchise. But then again, who am I kidding? Unless they were truly spectacular or truly terrible, there would have likely been no consensus among the fans. And I feel like Disney already thought they had the blessing of the fans to do whatever they wanted with the sequels after thinking no one liked the prequels. And so in closing, I really highly doubt Disney is looking to sell Star Wars or even open to the idea. I think they'd rather try to figure it out themselves and profit substantially off of it than sell it and potentially create a great rival for Marvel, or something that could trump Marvel and take over pop culture once again. As for Lucas, I'm sure he cares a great deal about the legacy of Star Wars, but does he care enough to buy it back, spend essentially the rest of his life trying to fix it, and then having to worry about what happens to it after the fact? Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. Do you think there's any chance Disney is looking to sell Lucasfilm, and that George Lucas could be a potential buyer? Or of course, you can always leave a question for a future lightning response video. And once again, this weekend, I'll be doing a Let's Talk Some Star Wars video to cover several of them that have been left on previous videos. Either way, do leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.